Hello again. In this video, we're going to talk about two very vital parts of process safety management: the process hazard analysis and the compliance audit. And they both are integral parts of any risk management program. So the first thing I'm going to do is share the PowerPoint with you so we can go over it, because I can't remember all this stuff. All right. Process safety management, 29 CFR 1910.119. Section E, process hazard analysis, commonly called a PHA. It has several sections: initial PHA requirements, methodologies that can be used, what the PHA must address, and information about the team, a system to address the findings, update every 5-year requirement, and retention requirement, which is the life of the process. Process hazard analysis. The employer shall perform an initial process hazard analysis, and why they put this in here of hazard assessment, hazard evaluation, on processes covered by this standard. The process hazard analysis shall be appropriate to the complexity of the process and shall identify, evaluate, and control the hazards involved in the process. Okay, that's pretty all-consuming. Identify, evaluate, and control the hazards involved in the process. Employers shall determine and document the priority order for conducting process hazard analyses based on a rationale which includes such considerations as extent of the process hazards, number of potentially affected employees, age of the process, and operating history of the process. The process hazard analysis shall be conducted as soon as possible, but no later than the following schedule. Now, this schedule is outdated, so we're not going to go over it. Process hazard analyses. Now, first of all, you notice the process hazard analysis is singular and analyses is the plural. It's one of those words like that in the English language. Completed after May 26, 1987, which meets the requirements of this paragraph, are acceptable as initial process hazard analyses. So in other words, if you go to a company, they don't have one, and you do one, that's going to have to be the initial one. All right. The employer shall use one or more of the following methodologies that are appropriate to determine and evaluate the hazards of the process being analyzed: what if, checklist, what if checklist, and what we're using in this one here is a what if checklist. Hazard and operability study, or HAZOP, failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA, fault tree analysis, or an appropriate equivalent methodology. So you can use something else if you can justify it, and it's equivalent and it's appropriate. The process hazard analysis shall address the hazards of the process, the identification of any previous incident which had a likely potential for catastrophic consequences in the workplace. So any investigation reports that have been done must be brought up here. Engineering and administrative controls applicable to the hazards and their interrelationships, such as appropriate application of detection methodologies to provide early warnings of releases. Acceptable detection methods might include process monitoring and control instrumentation with alarms and detection hardware, such as hydrocarbon sensors. There we go, engineering administrative controls. Consequences of failure of engineering and administrative controls. Let's face it, everything can fail. The process hazard analysis shall be performed by a team with expertise in engineering and process operations, and the team shall include at least one employee who has experience and knowledge specific to the process being evaluated. Also, one member of the team must be knowledgeable in the specific process hazard analysis methodology being used. So in this case, our consultant was knowledgeable in the specific process hazard analysis methodology being used, and we have plenty of people that were had experience and knowledge specific to the process being evaluated. The employer shall establish a system to properly address the team's findings and recommendations, assure that the recommendations are resolved in a timely manner, and that the resolution is documented. Document what actions are to be taken. Remember, just not what you found, but what actions are going to be taken. Complete actions as soon as possible. Develop a written schedule of when these actions are to be completed. Communicate the actions to operating maintenance and other employees whose work assignments are in the process and who may be affected by the recommendations or actions. So there's a lot of meat here. They establish a system to address the team's findings and recommendations, ensure they're done in a timely manner. And timely can be somewhat relative, but depending on the complexity and everything else. But we had a particular instance where on top of plant 2, there was one small space up on the roof where it had been a release in one particular place, and there were people up there. They could be trapped, couldn't get off that portion of the roof. So we put in steps and stuff, and it was very expensive and timely. And it took us a while to do it. It took us like a year to get done, but we got it done. So it doesn't have to be, timely manner doesn't necessarily mean 30 days, depending on the complexity of it. Employers shall retain process hazard analyses and updates or revalidations for each process covered by this section, as well as a documented resolution of recommendations described in paragraph E5 of this section for the life of the process. All right. So what they do in this, you do process hazard analysis, initial one, and then after that, you're basically doing updates and revalidations. So we're going to take a look at an actual PHA. Each section has a heading with this information on it: company, the facility, the date, the leader or secretary who was doing this, who was taking notes, and who was on the team. And you've seen this before. This is the IIAR, it's International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration. And our consultant claimed it was OSHA's too, but I couldn't swear to being OSHA's one. But this is the risk management matrix where the frequency goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, and the consequence goes to 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a simple matrix. There's your levels are 4, the highest, obviously in red. They get up with a red and orange and yellow and green. This is typical of a risk management matrix. Now, this is the actual process hazard analysis. And I'm going to have to get my glass on and read some of this stuff. Look at 1.1, generic compressor. In other words, this whole section is about generic compressors. What if there is no pressure relief valve or safety relief valve, SRV, on this equipment? And the scenario is an overpressure condition exists and there's no SRV, no safety relief valve. This causes a leak or rupture, resulting in an ammonia NH3 release. The chemical formula for ammonia is NH3 for anhydrous ammonia. Possible outcomes: employee injury, employee fatality, equipment damage, community evacuation, product contamination, fire explosion hazard, wastewater contamination, environmental hazard, interruption production, and plant evacuation. Now you see that particular end result is kind of boilerplate for a whole bunch of things that could happen here. If they're pretty serious, they could do all these things. And the controls are special safety relief valves are installed on all compressor separators with the exception of one unit. We found one unit that wasn't. And it was going to be done because they were going to updo the safety relief system in December of 2015. So, but that's why I say what's a what if, and it's a checklist because you're asking what if, and then you have a checklist to go through here, and you're pulling out the numbers here from the risk management and getting up the letter here. So B's and C's are kind of in the middle. And a lot of these safety relief things were going to be done on revamping it on 1/12/2015. So we're going to kind of look for things that need to have something done here. Now this is generic compressors. And this is interesting. What if compressor cutout safety interlocks are not designed to fail safe? And what we did to control that PM program is 5-year mechanical integrity, MI inspections, bullet 109 forms. 5-year on relief valves is we replace relief valves every 5 years. That was manufacturer's instructions. And to verify that was a good, we sent out 5 of them to be tested. We pulled out 5 that were in there for 5 years, 5 relief valves, pressure relief valves, sent them out to be tested, and they all passed. In other words, they all released at the appropriate pressure they were supposed to relief at, which meant that our program of replacement for 5 years seemed to be adequate. And here's a good one here, catalogs. Generic condenser facility siting. Now, facility siting means like where's stuff at, how's it located? What if valves are not accessible? There were some valves, this particular operation, that were really difficult to get to. And what happens now if an employee couldn't get to that valve and had to shut it off? So what we did was we put catwalks in so they could get to it instead of climbing up a ladder. It wasn't a permanent ladder. You get to it, we put catwalks in. So that's the kind of thing you look for, kind of thing you find, and the kind of thing that you take care of. Here's one where we didn't, there was, again, those safety relief valve installed, and we went ahead and installed it. And there's pressure valves. So we're asking all these similar questions. What if this has happened? What if this happened? And then what would happen in it? And what were the consequences? Like what here, 417, what if a small bore tubing piping is impacted? Small bore. So just a small, very small pipe. So it ruptures it. There'd be maybe employee injury and a slight ammonia loss. That all, and our answer with that was all piping is protected because we didn't have piping hanging out there. So this goes through all the different things and asks the same questions a lot of times. Generic evaporators, air unit coolers, piping. What if here 6.3? What if 6.3 piping? What if a flange gasket fails or flange bolt stretcher fail? And there's what could happen, and then that's the employee injury and fatality. All that stuff could happen. So what was our answer for the controls? PM program. PM means preventive maintenance program. Mechanical integrity audit. Bullet 109. Bullet 109 had forms you could use. It was IAR bullet 109, and we used those forms to do our mechanical integrity audits. So that's what that 109 means. And there's what if piping is mislabeled? Whoops. 611 piping, what if it's mislabeled? If piping is mislabeled, you can mess something up, but it was labeled in accordance with bullet 114, which was the IAR bullet for piping. Valves. And then we'll ask the same question about pumps and instruments and startup, shutting down compressors. And a lot of times, human factors, response to the process upsets. What if the refrigeration control activate a process upset? And the operator doesn't know that has occurred. Well, here are the controls. Training, we operator train. Rounds. Rounds meant that every hour, trained refrigeration department employees made rounds, and they checked specific things, pressures, temperatures, whatever, just visual inspections, and alarms were in place and they were tested, automated safety were in place, but rounds was an important part of the program. Have somebody walk around and look at stuff. So here is again ventilation system issues that we found. All right. Oh, that's what a process hazard analysis looks like. And you get some of these analysis like failure mode analysis. They're kind of like this, but they throw some more columns in there. Now, in addition to a process hazard analysis, which basically you're taking, what if this happens? What if this happens? Look at everything. What if a forklift hit this? What if somebody didn't do their job right? Trying to figure out this scenario. You also have compliance audits. Now, compliance audits are a little bit different in that all they're doing to see if you're in compliance with the rules and regulations. Employers shall certify that they have evaluated compliance with the provisions of this section, meaning PSM 119, at least every 3 years to verify that the procedures and practice developed under the standard are adequate and are being followed. At least every 3 years. Compliance audit shall be conducted by at least one person knowledgeable in the process. I certainly hope so. A report of the findings of the audit shall be developed. And if it says a report, it means written. The employer shall promptly determine and document an appropriate response to each of the findings of the compliance audit and document that deficiencies have been corrected. Employer shall retain the two most recent compliance audit reports. Now, you notice they don't give you like 30 days. They say promptly determine and document an appropriate response to each of the findings. Kind of leaves it open a little bit. So again, they're kind of giving you some wiggle room there if something is very, very complex. But generally speaking, they want you to do it pretty quick. If you find something wrong, you should be taking care of it. And this is an unusual requirement in OSHA too. Usually they tell you have to keep something for X number of time or days, or something like that. But they're saying, no, you have to retain the two most recent compliance audit reports. And as a general rule, if OSHA tells you to retain something, by all means, you do it. And then you throw out the old ones. You don't want them to come in and see something that's 10 years old and say, oh, somebody didn't sign this, and then cite you for it. They could. There's no set format for a compliance audit. So good idea is to use an outside contractor with PSM experience, at least at first, if you're not sure about it. So we're going to, the next thing we're going to look at is the form used by our consultant for our first compliance audits. And this is pretty small, so I got my glass on here. So the first part is records of employee participation, records review. Does a written program exist regarding employee participation? Here's the reference for 29 CFR 1910-119, and full compliance was yes, and then there's an explanation of it. And they didn't do interviews. They did records review. All right. He didn't have to do interviews. Process safety information, records review. As written process safety and records review, because when you have a process safety management program, you have a lot of records. And then here's it, like does it include toxicity information on your process safety information? But it's included in the MSDS. Back then they were MSDSs. So that's the answer there. Does it include block flow diagrams? Yes, they're all answered yes. Does it include ventilation system design? Ventilation calculations are included in both engine rooms. Does it include safety systems? Yes, safety systems are included in PSI. PSI is process safety information in this case. And interviews were not conducted. And of all the initial process hazard analysis being completed. So here you go. It's a compliance audit asking about PHAs. The initial PHA was completed in 1998. Since then, a PHA was completed in 2001 and 2004. And what in here says with acceptable methodology being used. There's the what if checklist methodology being used. Yeah. Again, this is a records view of the process, again, up here, of the process hazard analysis. This is a compliance audit, but they're asking about the process hazard analysis because they got to comply with it. Is the process hazard analysis team staff with the proper personnel? And here it says the team had one person that had formal training in the methodology that was used and one person that knew the refrigeration system in detail. Also included was the plant manager, the safety manager, and a union representative. I think that's boilerplate. And then interviews, this is about, okay. Process had not addressed clarity of procedures. So that was the checklist that our consultant used when we did the first couple of compliance audits. Now the EPA, when they came in, they used the RMP level 3 process checklist, RMP being a risk management program, level 3 checklist. We use this format internally for some of our subsequent compliance audits. But the difference being, now, remember the difference between OSHA and EMP, and EPA is OSHA is responsible for what? The employees. The EPA is responsible for the public. So that's why these are a little bit different, especially in some of the beginning of it. And also, you notice here, EPA always starts their things with, has the owner or operator done this, while OSHA says, or has the employer done this, or says the owner or operator must, and OSHA says the employer must. Now, one of the big differences too is because EPA is environmental protection agency and they're more concerned with the public. A lot of their stuff here has to do with the analysis of a possible release. We had a director of environmental, and he did all this stuff. There's some software that they use, and we're probably mentioned here, and he always had that. So, and it tells you if a release where it would go with the prevailing winds and stuff like that. So I'm not going to get into the details on that here, but that's part of it. So if you have something like a gas that could get released in the air, you have to have all this stuff. And there's releases, but this is all about release, because then this is, remember, this is the Environmental Protection Agency. So and you notice that they're using 68 0.2568 for EPA is almost the same as 119 in OSHA. Again, but they have more stuff in there concerning the environment, which OSHA doesn't. Let's see offsite impacts on the population. Reviewed and updated the offsite consequence analysis at least once every 5 years. And then after they get done with all the environmental stuff, then they just dive right into the same thing as 119, process prevention program safety information, process safety information. This is exact same stuff you're going to find in 119. Block flow diagram, process chemistry, inventory, exactly the same thing. So we're not going to cover this too much because we kind of went over this already. Has the owner or operator documented that equipment complies with general recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices? There's good old ragged gap again. And this particular form that I've got in here, isn't filled out. That's why you don't see circles on it. It's just a blank, which you can find pretty much online, pretty easy. There's the technologies we just talked about. Do a PHA. Now here again, this is a compliance audit, but they're actually auditing that you did the process hazard analysis. So it's all about a PHA. Operating procedures, they're auditing that you've done all this for the operating procedures. And our operating procedure really accessible to employees who are involved in a process. Have they been certified annually? All the stuff we covered under that section. They're asking if you've done all those. So again, compliance audit. Are you compliant with the standard? That's what this is all about. Training, correcting deficiencies. And we're not going to go into each one of these because we'll be here forever. PSSR, pre-startup safety review. That compliance audit, there you go. Compliance audit, auditing a compliance audit. Having compliance audits been done. Incident, as the owner or operator investigated each incident that resulted in or could reasonably have resulted in a catastrophic release of a regulated substance. Now, see, they say regulated substance, not a highly hazardous chemical. For all incident investigations initiated not later than 48 hours following the incident. Well, if you don't do that, you're an idiot. If you don't start that, it doesn't say finish it in 48 hours, but you got to start it in 48 hours. And does every report include this? Again, it's the same as 119. Employee participation, they just kind of put some things in a different area. And employee participation is almost like employee just information. Hot work permits, contractors. If you have highly hazardous chemicals, you have a lot of contractors come in, you got a lot of work to do, keeping tabs on them and making sure they're doing everything all right. Is a facility designated as a first responder in case of accidental release of regulated substances? And this is a little different. If the facility is not a first responder, then there's things they have to do too. Risk management plan. Again, program levels. This goes back to EPA stuff here. Anyhow, all right. If you have a facility and you have to make up your mind, not the facility, but the management of the facility, obviously, if you have a release, you have two things you can do. You can just let it go. You can evacuate, notify the first responders, fire, police, etc., and just let the release continue. It's okay to do that. It's not against the law to do that, but you realize you're going to have some highly hazardous chemical being released. And if you're in a populated area, that may produce injuries to civilians that are nearby. And everybody that breathes ammonia, even smells ammonia, is going to sue you for sure. So that's a decision that's going to be way above your pay grade, probably. But whatever you do, you still need to have a written plan. So as you can see, process safety management is a pretty comprehensive and a program, and it entails a lot of work. It entails a lot of documentation, and all this has to be available to inspectors. But if it's followed, there's a pretty good chance that your facility, the highly hazardous chemical in your facility is probably going to be contained properly. So that's it for process safety management. There are questions to be answered after this in this module. And so we'll see you down the road.